And this gives you the chance to do this. For those of you who are wondering, do not adjust your laptops or your set. Yes, I am in my attic, and that's the best we can do. I thought seriously about a Zoom background or being somewhere better the way Alicia is, but in the end, I'm just in my attic and owning it. And that's just the way it goes during pandemics. Of folks are at all different places, and as we are in different places and presenting in different ways, it's a good chance to talk about what happened and what got us here and what you should be doing as a result. So we're really excited to have folks who are with us today to have a chance to talk about this and where we want to go and where we suggest organizations go from here. I'm delighted to have several of my colleagues with me today. My name's Andy Freed. I'm the CEO of Virtual. I've been at this for 20-something years, and among us, we were trying to do the math. We've got like 60 years or something of experience, or some crazy number of decades and decades of experience. But my job has been as CEO of Virtual for the last few years, is helping organizations grow and change and form and get them to the next level. I'm delighted to have my colleagues with me. Greg, maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Greg Kahn. I'm the Chief Growth Officer with Virtual. I focus on helping to bring new client organizations into Virtual and spending a lot of time with our client organizations, particularly in the standard setting and tech consortia space, shape themselves and drive strategy and whatnot.
Thanks, Greg. Alicia?
Hi, everybody. I'm Alicia Johnson. I appreciate you all joining today, and I hope you're well. I'm Senior Vice President here at Virtual, overseeing the tech and standards practice. I help drive strategy and operations within our standards body clients. And I'll just say that, like many of you, I haven't been out of my zip code for the last 2 months, which is very unusual for me. I typically travel 2 to 3 weeks out of the year, as do Greg and Andy. So what we're talking about today has been well practiced over the last few months by all of us.
And I love that Alicia has the world map behind her, to remind her of when we used to go places. That was awesome. Remember when we used to leave our houses? That was so much fun. We'll get back to that soon enough. But until then, we want to talk about what can you do, what should you be doing? And the reality is that we went from traveling around the planet and all of us having face-to-face meetings and all of these things. Life changed all of a sudden. For the dinosaurs, they got to watch that, watch the asteroid hit and say, well, this doesn't really have a happy ending. Our job is to make this a little bit better than what happened for the dinosaurs and figure out, well, how are we going to live on? How are we going to get to the next level? And how are we going to continue to grow our organizations? And what should we be thinking about to do, in these circumstances? And the dinosaurs had their problem. They went extinct. For us, what we really need to talk about is how we can adapt. And it's not perfect out there. And this is an actual action photo of my front walk. Especially since I learned that all of the bad things that my wife told me about Roundup and actually are true. So now this is an action photo of my front walk with weeds coming through. But you need to be able to adapt to an imperfect environment. And what great organizations do more than anything is they're able to take the imperfections that are out there, recognize that there's never going to be a time that things are perfect. And right now we're a long way from things being perfect. And how do you adapt to it? How do you get to the next level? How do you make things happen? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, by now, everybody has, over the course of the last few months, probably been on more Zoom webinars and conferences than you can ever imagine. We're going to try to be a little different. We're going to keep this a little bit informal and conversational today. We're going to violate the law and not just read our slides to you, but we will make our slides available to you after this, so you have a chance to try to read them yourself and try to do the home game with the webinar on your own. But we're going to try to just make this a little bit more conversational and informal. So there's going to be 7 strategies we're going to talk about. We're going to walk through each one of these things. I won't do the business karaoke of reading this slide off to you, but rest assured, we're going to talk about everything from meetings to keywords. And I'm not going to reveal our magic word just yet, because what fun is that? Then you won't stay to the end and find out who did it. So Alicia, you've been on quite a bunch of meetings these days, and I think you spend more time on conference calls than any 3 people I know. maybe you could talk about meeting online effectively and what you've seen go well, and some of the disasters that you've seen.
Yep, absolutely. The key word here is meeting online effectively. We've all been on calls that didn't seem particularly effective. Starting with the basics, a few tips. Keeping things simple and professional in terms of your backdrop. Put yourself somewhere within your home or area that you're calling in from that you can really focus. People running around and being in a busy area is tough. I would say that, probably the biggest tip that I have, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, is really thinking about the meeting content in advance, being as prepared as you can be, and then be ready to go on time and make sure that you're honoring everybody else's time on the call. So
Alicia, do you have any kind of a list of tips or anything that you can provide people? Because, boy, that would really be like
I have seven, Andy. That's the magic number for me today.
Oh, my gosh. I'm so glad that I jotted these down as you were thinking them.
So number one, keep it short. Many of you within the standards world are probably transitioning what would have been 2 or 3 or 4 day meetings into, gosh, what do we do now? How do we get it to be online? Transitioning to an online meeting, there's been some great things about it, and I'll talk about that. But what would have been a full day session, really, it's hard to keep people's focus beyond a 2-hour session. So I would condense material as much as possible. If you need to expand into multiple shorter meetings over a couple of different days, we have found that that's been really effective. And remember, if you're more than an hour, I would add a short break in there, give people a bio break or a chance to check their email. The second is prepare, and I talked about this in my intro. Really thoughtful agenda planning is pretty important here. Sending out the agenda and any pre-read packages, designing consent agendas, and especially particularly lengthy documents allows for attendees to get right to the point when they're convening. They can get right into the discussion that way. Using the right tools for the job. As I'm sure you have all experienced over the last several weeks, there are many different video and conference call tools out there, and they all work a little bit differently. The factors to consider: how many attendees are you planning? Do you have any breakout needs or some complexities? What's your ratio of video to screen share needs? Are you really going for people being able to look at each other, the maximum number of people to be able to look at each other, or is most of this about sharing some documents on a screen? We use basic tools very frequently here at Virtual for a few folks. There are obviously meetings where we have a much more elaborate needs and the number of attendees, and there are tools such as the one we're using today, which is Zoom Webinar, GoToWebinar for more complex meeting needs. So really thinking about the tools. Remember time zones. This is challenging. I know that many of you, like me, are working in a global environment all the time. So I would say that, one of the things that we're doing is really thinking about the most active attendees and where they reside, and really scheduling meeting times to cater to the people that need to be the most engaged and involved at the meeting. That doesn't make it easy for somebody that's gracious enough to join at 11 p.m. or 5 a.m. That tends to be the way of the world with regard to time zones. But also consider video and audio expectations. Here in the Bay Area where I reside, very early mornings tend to be prime time to span Asia, Europe, and North America. So I'm well adept at the 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Some of you on the call have joined me on those. I tend to practice a no video rule before 8 a.m., but that's not because I want to read my email. That's because I'm probably not great on video at that hour, and that's okay. And as is, somebody that's joining very late at night. So, be thinking about what your meeting needs are in relationship to the time zone stuff.
One thing I've seen people trip on that one, Alicia, is even things like just thinking about breaks. There's nothing I enjoy more than when you're on one of these calls. It's 12 o'clock. When you have people on from Europe, people on from the West Coast, it gets to be 12 o'clock Eastern, and somebody says, "No, let's take an hour-long lunch break."
Right.
and texting you on, Alicia, we want you to force feed yourself lunch at 9 in the morning. Yeah, so remembering that's so important. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, and even swinging things a half an hour, but I would say small breaks are important. But yeah, the thought that we're going to have a 1 hour break in the middle of anything that's an extended meeting is difficult. Number 5, video killed the radio star and the multitasker. For those of you as old as I am, you will remember that was a pop song from years back. Having people on video, I have to say, I've been a remote person for quite some time, and in some ways it's heaven to be able to see everybody's face rather than to watch a large conference room where other people are located and I'm the one that's remote. It helps everybody, I think, really engage with each other. Having that eye contact helps people stay away from their emails. And what we've seen with some of our standards bodies is that it really helps people get to know each other better. These are people from all over, and it's been a nice community builder over these last few months. Often groups are getting together once a quarter, and they might not have really the opportunity to see each other and get to know the voices and the faces that go with those. And so that's been a nice thing. One tip here on video, and it's a simple one, is just to make sure that your camera's set up at eye level and straight on. I actually was on a call last week where all that I could see was the close-up left arm of somebody, and it was just distracting for an hour that the arm kept moving, but I never got to see the person's face. Engage rather than a lecture format, discussion wherever possible. And again, really thinking about the agenda. How can your agenda accommodate interaction? How can you use a variety of speakers? Even if it's material that typically in a face-to-face would be one person reporting out, how can you break that up and have just a change of pace and timing, which is my last one, pacing and time management. Pretty simple, just keep the meeting and the discussion on track and end at the planned time, just like we're starting it on time, end those meetings on time.
Thanks,
those are my 7. I'm sure there's more. Andy, comments?
That was like a webinar within a webinar. That was pretty exciting. It's like, just as a bonus webinar, we got all of these tips on online meetings, but I think it's so important. And, right now, this is how we're meeting. And this is how the world is functioning, and doing it right and doing it well is so critical. But it's also critical that as we have these meetings that, they're not just for the sake of, you shouldn't be meeting just for the sake of meeting. You should be meeting to try to get some decisions done. And I know, Greg, that's something which you've always felt strongly about, and you've been able to guide so many groups through driving decisions and getting to a decision process in a different environment. So how are people doing that now, and what tips do you have?
Yeah, sure. I just made sure I finished my email before I put myself on video, so make sure I'm in compliance with Alicia's rules. I have an adage that whenever you come out of a situation working as a group, particularly a distributed group that's meeting on a video meeting or call, and they work through either a single or multiple tough decisions elegantly and smoothly, usually that traces back to someone having done their homework ahead of that meeting. And speaking from a long term of experience in standard setting consortia, working with boards, it's really tough to just enter a meeting and go through the entirety of a decision-making process, where people have to lay out their perspectives. You have to do triage to figure out how much alignment or discord you have across the group, etc. And a technique that we teach both our staff as well as our volunteer leaders is to do the homework and really to put the work in up front to understand what decisions have to be made, and how best to move into the decision space. And ultimately, you want to get to a profile where you're using your time together. And as Alicia just noted in the last segment, your time in an online meeting or a phone call is more precious than the time you might have in a full day or multi-day face-to-face meeting. You want to be smart about it. You want to be concise. So you want to build toward the decision and use your time to make the decision. And as a leader, whether you're representing the staff side or the chairperson of a group, or helping to facilitate a session, do that homework, do your pre-work, reach out to as many of the constituents that will be involved in that decision ahead of time, get their perspectives, start to build either a mental map or even a paper map to understand everyone's position on a certain issue. If you want to take a slightly more formal step, take straw polls, do some other kinds of polling to just get that assessment. And then make sure, as Alicia noted earlier, you circulate pre-reads so that everyone is up to date on everyone else's positions and what the decision is that you're trying to reach and what the ramifications of that decision are. So again, the key takeaway here is the more work you put up front to pull your group into decision-making posture, I think the more effective your group will be in making decisions while they're meeting and while they're on, video meetings and phone calls and whatnot. And that pre-work
Greg, I
is
know
really going to make
you've
a
used some pretty
difference.
cool tools on that too, don't you? Aren't there some things that you've done online that have helped you in that process?
We have some really great tools at our disposal. And the nice thing that we've seen in the landscape is that there's an increasing core of technology firms that understand that decision-making is a science and less an art. And we've tried an array of different tools, platforms, etc. There's no right answer here, but I'll share some anecdotal examples of a tool that we've started to use pretty roundly across virtual and on behalf of our client organizations. And that particular tool is called PowerNoodle. You can find out more information at powernoodle.com. And this is a science-based platform. It's a web-based service, and really it's positioned as a decision-making platform. It has what they call smart anonymity, so you can invite an unlimited amount of people into what they call a decision space. And basically it supports workflows from loose casual brainstorming toward the down select process through ratings and rankings and prioritizations and even voting. And personally, I've used it for strategic planning. I've used it to help groups focus around decision making leading into a meeting. And you can even use a tool like this during a meeting. So rather than just have conversation, you can take a 5-minute break from your meeting, ask people to type ideas into a decision space, do a quick 3-minute ranking process, and you'll get a lot of data and intelligence out of that. So use technology smartly and wisely wherever you can. Like I mentioned, we've been using this PowerNoodle tool more and more in the course of our work and helping our client groups work toward decisions. And I think it's made a really tremendous impact.
Thanks, Greg. So, another piece of this, and Greg's been around in the standards world for a long time, as is Alicia and as have I. I love the way, and when I look at some of the names that are on this call, for everyone who isn't with the standards group, you're on a Zoom call. For the folks who are on standards groups, they're getting all excited of, hey, look at the way the video codecs are interacting, and this is pretty cool. And look at the way we've come across something that works on multiple platforms. And in the end, that's what standards groups are all about. It's making things happen, making things interoperable, but more than anything, filling in gaps in the marketplace and making it so that you're able to have tools that work across the market. One of the things that I think is so important right now, and so important for every group, we always talk to groups about doing environmental scans and looking out there at what's happening in the environment. Right now, there are gaps in the environment and places where standards groups might have opportunities to do things. This has been the big bang of telemedicine. Telemedicine has gone through the roof in the last few months, just as Zoom conferences and online conferences of all kinds have gone through the roof. But as telemedicine escalates, what are the standards needs for that? Travel and hospitality. I looked the paper this morning. There's an article about JetBlue requiring masks now for flights. American Airlines suggesting that now flights that masks be worn in terminals. Well, are there going to be any standards on how travel works and how hotels work going forward. Logistics. There are huge logistics gaps that happened over the course of this COVID pandemic that certainly are opportunities for organizations to do more. Contact-free data exchange. Yeah, that's something we've been working on for years with the NFC Forum. And there's even more opportunities with that now as folks are less apt to shake hands and less apt to pass things back and forth. What are the chances to do more rather than less of that? And finally, geolocation and data privacy. These are just a few things. Geolocation's so critical when you start looking at contact tracing. But these are opportunities for standards groups to start thinking about what are the things that we're doing right now within our standards ecosystem, and can we help on some of the problems and challenges that are out there? You're not going to get there by just sticking to your work plan. You're going to get there by looking out and seeing what are the problems and things we need to address. Greg, you look like you've got something to add.
Yeah, one low-hanging opportunity for a lot of standards organizations or consortia, many of them have liaison agreements or liaison relationships that are in existence. And, this current time may be a great opportunity to just take stock of those liaison arrangements or, the outside organizations that you've partnered with through such agreements, and reach out and talk to them, because that may be a great way to understand where some of these new opportunities might exist, and more importantly, how your respective organizations might work collaboratively to address some of these new opportunities or these new needs across different markets.
No, that's a great point, Greg. And I think it's so important to make those liaison agreements something that are really coming to life and not just a piece of paper that's in a in a file cabinet or on a hard drive somewhere. So the next piece that we say, beyond minding the gaps, there's another piece out there, building continuity plans. So before I let Alicia take this, Alicia doesn't have the same affinity for every 80s movie that I do, but one of my favorite of the Civil War movies, I love the movie Glory. There's a scene when they're attacking the fort at the end, and spoiler, it doesn't go well. They're attacking a fort, and the actor Matthew Broderick, playing Lieutenant Colonel Shaw, asked the question of, if this man should fall, who will lift the flag and carry on? Because the idea is that the person at the front of the brigade carrying the flag, that's a position of honor. And if somebody if that person falls, somebody needs to pick up the flag and maintain that position. That's business continuity. And right now there's a lot of challenges out there with business continuity and things that folks should be thinking about. So, Alicia, how about another webinar within a webinar? What are the things we should be thinking about?
Certainly, life happens. This is about pandemic planning, but it's not just about pandemic planning, and business continuity makes sense really at any time. Many of you may remember when there was a volcano in Iceland several years ago that prohibited air travel for weeks. Many standards body meetings got canceled at that time. I'm sure that you've all experienced times in your organization when a key employee or a standards body volunteer changed companies, or somebody stepped away because they had a sabbatical or a maternity leave. What to do about that, and how does your organization, how does your standards body stay afloat and stay humming along? Of particular note are things like, who's the organizational spokesperson? Certainly there would be a primary person for that, but who's the backup? And is that person trained? Are they ready to go at a moment's notice? Document editors. Working groups spend, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears getting things to fruition. At the last minute, you wouldn't want to have a bump in the road because a document editor fell off the cliff somewhere, and there's weeks of non-activity. Leadership within your groups, whether that be a committee or a working group or a board of directors, what would be the plan if somebody needed to step away unexpectedly? And then just keeping the flow of finances moving along, the process for releasing and approving payables are things to think about. So let's move to the next slide, and kind of what's the preparedness to that? And I would just say, ask yourself these questions. This is where I actually will read from the slide. Are your processes documented, and where are they? Does everybody know where to find them? How do you avoid single points of failure? Are you using collaborative tools to ensure work continuity? And are policies and procedures streamlined and simplified? If you're able to thoughtfully consider and answer those questions, then you've got the confidence that you're well positioned when something unforeseen might arise.
Thanks, Alicia. I totally agree with what you're saying. This isn't just about pandemics. Things happen and life happens all the time. And it's remarkable how many times we've had over the years folks leave a group, or somebody's out unexpectedly, and all of a sudden work grinds to a halt. And you can't afford to have that in your group. And this is a good wake-up call of how that can suddenly happen, and how things can change. And while change happens, one thing that doesn't that certainly doesn't change is the need for security, and the need for folks who also take advantage of bad situations. The reality is that criminals love chaos. We've been fortunate so far. Actually, really been, both Alicia and I don't even know who Greg is. He's just a Zoom bomber that popped into this meeting and started talking. But Zoom bombing's a piece of it, but unfortunately there are things also that are a lot worse. The number of phishing attacks have been huge. Interpol has talked about phishing attacks that are specifically targeting hospitals right now, and targeting healthcare organizations, and ransomware that's targeting healthcare. This is a very bad time for cybercrime. It brings me to another 80s movie, of course, as most of life does for me. If there's two things I enjoy, it's 80s movies and copyright violations of copying pictures into my PowerPoint presentations. Two of my hobbies. For those that don't remember this one, which is probably most of you on the call, the last thing that Indiana Jones was told before he went to look for the Holy Grail: trust no one. And of course, again, movie, spoiler alert, he should have taken the advice, because whole movie, wacky set of misadventures when he didn't trust people. Bad things happened. But for standards groups, as you're looking at that, it's think about things like passwords on calls. It's so basic, but making sure that not just every Zoom call, but every call you're on should have a password. That's so critical. Thinking about things other than email to share protected documents. Email is not the best way to do that, but having online tools, and I know we've been doing some work with a document repository and building out some things in Salesforce. There's other tools out there as well. I think this is really important for folks to think about how you should do that. Now, the next one's ironic because we already announced that we're recording this meeting, but in general, be careful about recording conference calls and web meetings. Hey, I just admitted earlier to copyright violation. That's now on tape. I was just kidding about that for all the people that are listening. But understanding that when you record these things, you're creating a record, and a discoverable record. And that can be tricky. That's why we always tell folks, when you're taking minutes for a consortium meeting, make sure you capture the joy of the conclusion and not the pain of the discussion. And that having the record and having a recording of the conference call, well, that can sometimes be the pain of the discussion, and you need to be careful about that. As again, now I'll go from 80s movies to 70s movies. As I said in All the President's Men, there's never a problem with having a tape of anything. That never goes badly. And lastly, making sure that for your members, that they treat the consortium's information with a lot of care. Greg, what do you got on this? Or Zoom bomber below me on the screen? What do you have?
I am a Zoom bomber, so I'm trying to make my way here. But yeah, just the care of information in a standards group or a tech consortium is really critical. I mean, it's critical across any collaborative environment, but keep in mind that there's often intellectual property tied to a lot of the ideas or content shared between members. And I think bullet number 2 on this screen really calls for good hygiene, especially in these times with the backdrop of security challenges that we have. It takes an extra step a lot of times to take a Word document or some file and put it into an online repository. It's well worth that step, because I think the damages or the risk of not doing that are pretty high.
Thanks, Greg. One of the other things that I'm struggling with right now, when I look at standards groups and think about things, it's so hard to even know whether or not groups are doing well and what's happening. The usual metrics don't apply anymore. Greg, you've been pretty good at helping organizations find their way through this. So, what are the things that people should be thinking about, and how do you want to change the dashboard for the times?
Yeah, when we guide clients strategically on, during normal times, we often try to make sure that their goals and objectives tie back to a key performance indicator. And, often that has, the deliverables of the organization, it has the financials of the organization and other factors. But as you noted, Andy, I think these times require, perhaps an adjustment of some of those key indicators, regardless of what your strategy is. One key indicator that we've been looking for across our portfolio of clients is really on membership engagement. And particularly for groups that are doing collaborative work, setting standards, creating specifications, et cetera. Engagement is critical, and participation is critical. I think we all kind of know the 80-20 rule in these forums, whereby 20% of the folks tend to roll up their sleeves and drive the work, and the other 80% tend to observe and sort of comment. I think what we want to watch for is that 20% of active participation doesn't dribble down to 10% or less, because that's just going to stall progress. The other key reason to focus on engagement is tied to just financial outlook. With organizations having to postpone or even cancel meetings or seminars or whatnot, membership dues revenue becomes increasingly important. And as organizations, work into renewal cycles, particularly if they're anniversary and they happen during the middle of the year, engagement tends to be a leading indicator of membership renewals. So if you're seeing a drop off in participation and activity in working groups, committees, et cetera, you really want to pay attention to how that could impact your financials as member organizations come up for renewals. And then that's also just a good kind of standing reminder in any time to really make membership value proposition a key hallmark of your strategy. You have to be delivering value to members across a whole spectrum of different activities and pathways. And then finally, deliverable schedules. So, oftentimes in standards groups and technology collaborations, having a steady series of face-to-face meetings serve as key milestones to bring your collaborators together. And we all know that face-to-face meetings just accelerate progress. Well, now we're in a world where those face-to-face meetings cannot happen. Referencing back to Alicia's early slide, if meetings have to be shorter to mind attention spans and whatnot, how do we make sure that those deliverables continue? And we want to make sure that they're getting done in a time window that is market relevant. So some organizations can't afford to have their work drift behind schedule because it's not going to get into the hands of the companies to implement and adopt in the right time frame. So there's actually a pretty deep interconnectivity between all of these elements. But the key here is, as Andy said at the top, adjust your dashboard to the current situation and probably manage it on a more agile, more reflexive manner than you might typically, because you probably have to pivot, just as your financial or membership data tells you a certain story.
Oh, thanks, Greg.
Greg, I think those are great, and I would just add in that the 80-20 rule. We've got 20% of a typical group that's quite active, and they might be very, very clear on the member value and what's compelling about that. I would add communication as a piece, so that other 80% is very clear on all of the really important points that you laid out, to communicate that very often to the members, so that as their renewals come up, as they're thinking about engagement in the group, they're really clear on the compelling activity that the group is providing.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think in today's situation, The risk of over communicating is low. And I think groups should also think about trying to communicate across as many different media as possible, email, social channels, in their collaboration tools, et cetera. So that's a great point.
Thanks. Thank you both. So before we have the reveal of the big magic word, a reminder that at the end of this, we'll be taking questions. There, you can put your questions into the chat function. We'll take any questions about the material we covered, or if anyone would like to give Alicia a geography bee, Alicia will locate any country which somebody puts into the chat window on her map. So you can try to stump her, but we'll take any questions at the end. But on the magic word, more than anything, this is it: flexibility. I will tell you very honestly, I did not see this coming. If anyone had said to me, Andy, this is how 2020 is going to go. For a while, you're going to have a couple of good meetings. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure there's no more face-to-face meetings. And we're going to ask you to work in your attic for about 3-4 months. I don't think that I would have said that sounds like a really good plan for 2020. And I don't think anybody would have. We didn't see it coming. And I think the key for every organization is that the organizations that survive are the ones that can bend without breaking, the ones that can be flexible, that can adjust to different circumstances and adjust on the fly. The bad news for everyone is change hasn't stopped. And the reality of the next few months and probably the next few years is we're going to see other changes. Meetings that you might have planned might not happen. There might be disruptions that happen, or if they do, that a meeting happens and then you realize that we need to shut down. We had a client that had a meeting going on, and then there was an order that there should be no more gatherings of people over 100 during the first weeks of the pandemic. Things are going to happen. Things are going to keep changing. There's going to continue to there'll be challenges on all different fronts. Flexibility is really the watchword right now, and understanding that things are going to keep changing and you need to adapt to it or you're going to break. And that's probably more than anything, the most important thing that we'd like to see people take away from this is remember that magic word and think about it. And to Greg's earlier point on deliverables, at times that means adjusting your deliverable schedules. Sometimes that means moving things back. Sometimes that's also going to mean moving things forward. We've had organizations that had various standards in play that were on a 2 or 3 year time cycle, but things about this pandemic made it more necessary for those things to move forward. Sometimes you need to move things up on the work plan as well. So that's the magic word. So it's so important in all of this. And I guess I got again on flexibility. Sometimes I'll forget the next slide that's coming, so I'll talk to it anyway. But a few things on this: ask, listen, and repeat. Recognize that the answers you get today might be different than the answers you get tomorrow. If we did a survey of people asking if they had travel restrictions on March 1st, the answer would be, well, a handful of companies do. Well, if we did that same survey today, very different. You need to make sure you're asking things over and over again. The stop and hold list: what are the things, if things get worse, what are projects that you can stop and not do? Perfect attendance is impossible. We're watching organizations right now get tripped up on, we need to have this, have this meeting, but some people can't make it. Yeah, some people aren't going to make it. Sometimes, to Alicia's point, there's time zones. You need to have a meeting. And I've watched a lot of colleges get tripped up on this, where they start doing online instruction and forget that their students are international. Sometimes people aren't going to be able to make it. That's why we're recording this webinar. We've got, Greg is like the David Hasselhoff of Hawaii and Australia. People love him there. But they're out of time zone, so they're going to want to watch this later. That's just the way it goes. Making sure we have those opportunities to do that, and that means perfect attendance isn't possible. What can you do to accommodate it? And don't be a prisoner of your process. Right now is not the time to say this is how we've always done it. Greg, Alicia, other thoughts?
Yeah, just a clarification, Andy. I'm the David Hasselhoff of Grenada.
Sorry. Oh, yes. But you're working your way up, though.
I am. It's a process.
So with that, we come to the close of our prepared remarks, but we'd love to open it up to questions. So if folks will take a moment, if you have questions, want to put Alicia through the geography bee, or anything you'd like to ask, we'd be happy to address them. So
Yeah, Andy, there's one that came in the chat window rather than the Q&A window, but I think it's worthy of talking about, which is, ultimately for an organization that relies on plugfests to, for conformance testing or interoperability testing, how do organizations approach that? And we have a number of organizations in our portfolio that do what I'll call plugfest testing.
yep.
We haven't necessarily had to handle that challenge just yet, but I would say at a most basic level, a lot of the approaches that we've outlined today are probably applicable to that. I mean, some of it depends on the level of privacy and secrecy that you have to maintain to protect, different technologies under development. But, kind of bridging some of the recommendations we've made about, how virtual or groups can do their work well virtually in this forum, plus a lot of work that we've done in running and planning online meetings and conferences. I think there's lots of goodness in those two spheres that could apply to running basically a virtual plugfest. The thing that I would add on that side, without going, I think the details of each plugfest environment require probably very specific approaches, but I also think there's a broader opportunity for standard setting organizations and the technology consortia landscape that, as much as we can figure out how to conduct those activities in a virtual model because of this situation, it may allow us to be more adaptable and more agile in supporting those activities ongoing. And a lot of organizations sort of have a quarterly or periodic cycle where companies come together and do interoperability testing in person and whatnot. I think if we can find ways to disrupt that model, it might allow companies to actually exchange, prototype information and, have those prototypes work with one another on a faster cycle. And it might allow the industry to just be more nimble. So I kind of, in a lot of ways look at challenges in front of us as longer term opportunities. And I think there is one, but to the core question, I think it's the general good hygiene of, how groups should work together, and also tapping into some of the, the good hygiene around running an effective online meeting. And I think in my mind, I can see how that could apply to online plugfests or interoperability testing activities.
Thanks, Greg. So another question that came in had to do also with events, but less plugfest, but just for face-to-face events and in general. And the question is just when do we think that group events will be back? Should we assume that they're all gone for 2020? And I guess I'll take that one. If you go back to the last slide, flexibility. We have no idea is the answer to that. So yesterday I read two stories that were basically back to back on my news feed. One story was from the Orlando Sentinel, and it said that Disney World working on plans to reopen in June. And another story came from a different publication that said Disney World to remain closed through 2021, into 2021. The stories were about 5 minutes apart. And the reality is nobody really has a handle on it. I think it's safe to say that meetings and large scale events for the balance of 2020 will need to be flexible, which means that start planning now for it. So the conferences that we have for the fourth quarter, we're taking a look at, seeing whether or not there's an opportunity for doing things online. We're seeing to see whether or not there's an opportunity to do hybrid meetings where we might do something where there's a face-to-face meeting for some folks, and then we're asking, folks to be able to visit, to be able to join by webcast if they're not able to attend. Flexibility is going to be really important. If you look at it and start thinking about things for the fourth quarter of this year, that's by my calendar 4 months away. And if you think about where we were in this crisis 4 months ago, compared to where we are today, 4 months ago, nobody knew what COVID was. Very few people had heard the phrase coronavirus, and yet here we are. Where could we be 4 or 5 months from now? I don't know, a lot's possible, but make sure that as an organization, you're planning for every eventuality with it. That's the best thing you can do. Last piece on that is the advice that we're giving clients right now is in terms of hotel contracts, in terms of looking at things, wait it out a bit. You can't cancel an event because of fear, because you're afraid things are going to be bad in the fourth quarter. You can only cancel an event when something has actually happened. So be flexible, recognize that it might take some time before cancellation clause kicks in, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be preparing. So
yeah, and yeah, I would just add to that one other area of consideration for organizations. There's sort of the health-driven timetable, which hopefully is shorter than longer for obvious reasons. But then there's the economic realities that I think many associations and many standards groups are going to have to wrestle with potentially for a much longer time. So even if your association or group is able to have a face-to-face meeting because the health-related issues have abated, you might have to contemplate a scenario for some period of time where you just don't have as much critical mass of attendees or participants as you once did, either because people are just naturally worried about traveling, or there may be more budget restrictions within their member companies that don't allow them to travel to standards meetings or to working group sessions and things like that. So I can see a scenario for some period of time where companies still want to leverage the face-to-face meeting as a key anchor point for progress, but probably work in a bit of a hybrid mode to make sure that for those that can't, for legitimate reasons, attend and participate, that you're not leaving them behind.
Nope, agree completely. And certainly,
Yeah.
and we have a few questions that have come in on events, but Alicia, please.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of add to that and address some of the questions that have just come up. Another thing that we're advising several clients when they have the opportunity is to transition from what may have been a pattern of meeting in hotels. If you have the size of meeting that you can plan the next 1 or 2 face-to-face as a hosted event within one of your member companies, it lowers the risk financially often, because there's more flexibility to making changes. And then also, if you have a smaller attendee rate for purposes that Greg said, it can make a difference financially. So that's something that we're recommending. There's a couple of questions about, do we think that this will change the face-to-face meeting cadence of many of our standards groups? And I think that, it's pretty common to see either quarterly meetings or 3-time-a-year meetings face-to-face with a number of video conference call activities as an interim. We may, and I think that, to Andy's point, we don't really know what things are going to look like. But I think that get a few people together face to face for a couple of hour meetings, which sometimes does happen. Have we proven to each other that kind of activity can not happen by people flying for hours? In some cases, yes. But I think that what we hear predominantly through so much of our meeting activity feedback is that, while the primary purpose of a group getting together might be to develop specifications or standards, the networking part of it's a really key factor. And that is something that's pretty challenging to do. I talked about, building a community with video calls, and that's something that we're definitely working on, even enhancing with some sort of, coffee chats within video. But I think that ultimately does not replace the face-to-face meeting. So I think that, when we have the opportunity to be back in that environment, I can see a number of groups gravitating towards trying to make that happen as quickly as we can get back to it.
Yeah, and on that question of networking, I will say there's a flip side to it as well. which is that people are pretty available right now. And people have gotten very accustomed also to meeting via video conference rather than meeting face to face. And while at times meeting with somebody on the West Coast or fly, and I've flown to Japan for 2-hour meetings, and I'm sure many of the people on this call have done that. But now there's an opportunity to meet with some folks via video conference and do it in an hour and be right back. Take advantage of that. And go through your LinkedIn and take a look at how you can connect some folks. I've been on some great calls with some organizations, where we just have open discussion, a chance to meet some folks, and we'll just say we're going to have an open Zoom call from 6 to 7 tonight. Here's a chance to connect with some folks. So I think that there's a real some upsides in the networking side as well.
Yeah, Andy, one other extension to that, again, thinking ahead to the point when things are more opened up, I think we all understand that's probably going to be at different intervals across different parts of the world and, different parts of our country. We've helped a lot of clients in good times organize smaller, more local meetups, and I suspect that they may have some value that as different regions or areas open up maybe faster than others, organizations can help, support and empower, some of their members to come together and do that networking, kind of casual meetup. And, that may be a good strategy to kind of start small and start light, but get people together where you can.
So Alicia, we got a question about time zones that, you got the map behind you, so you could actually point out where all the time zones are. But in essence, it's about rotating time zones, and I think you've done some meetings like this where they're live for some folks, and then you might have office hours or things at another hour that's a little bit more of a civilized hour for folks. Can you speak to how that's worked?
Yeah, exactly. And I see this came in from Renat in London, and he and I actually were just speaking about this last week. It's quite challenging, and we with the tools that we have available today are fortunate in that we do have the opportunity to have some part live, part getting people involved, whether that be at a delay that they're listening to a videotape, or they're chiming in if they're in a reasonable time zone to chime in from their location. No matter what, this is a challenge, and I think that maybe you have experienced where you've got 50 people in a room together, and you're trying to listen in, you're trying to hear what's happening. That creates some tough scenarios. But I think that we do have more tools than we've had available to have people be able to participate that way.
Yeah, Alicia, I'll agree with that fully and add, the reference I made earlier to that powernoodle.com decision platform. I think one of its inherent values is that you can drive decision making asynchronously. And I've worked with a number of groups, across many different time zones and many different regions of the world on strategic planning and whatnot. And having that asynchronous decision-making capacity is really a great accelerator of work. And again, referencing the earlier parts of our presentation, I think the more homework you can do with your decision-making group ahead of having to get on a meeting or a call, hopefully that minimizes that pain that people have to share of having, too many rotating phone calls in the middle of the night and whatnot.
Yep.
Fantastic. So, and Greg, you're getting feedback, getting fan mail on asynchronous decision making. That's impressive. Never before has that phrase ever gotten fan mail, but that's very, very impressive. But Greg, last question for you that I'll send your way, which comes from Michael Ayers. So again, watch your answer because he's an attorney and a good one. So be careful. But a question about whether, on some of the tools that are out there, are there opportunities to try them on trials, or how might somebody be able to try some of the things that are out there for collaborative tools?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that wearing the virtual hat, because we support so many different clients with different needs and wants on the technology side. We have access to and support a whole bunch of different platforms, and certainly for clients in our portfolio, I think we're readily able to share and do show and tells with across a lot of these platforms. Even for people that are not currently part of our portfolio, if they'd like to pick our brain and jump into another Zoom meeting, and have us do some show and tell, we'd be happy to do that. We're in a unique position of having seen and used so many different platforms, applications, tools. The more we can share that knowledge with this community, especially in this time, I think we'd be happy and willing to do that.
And again, what I would just echo, and it's a great place for us to wrap up as we get to the top of the hour. That goes beyond just tools. Our charge to our fee for kibitzing is $0. And I know that the three of us are always happy to chat with organizations that are having challenges, see if there's an opportunity to collaborate on how we may be able to solve those. In the end, that helps all of us. So we're always happy to have those conversations, and we'll be sharing this, the recording of this webinar. But along with that, we'll also have our contact information if folks have additional questions. We'd love to hear from you if you have ideas. We'd love to have that opportunity to chat with folks. So. Really appreciate folks spending an hour with us today. There's certainly a lot to think about in the world these days. If there's one thing we wish we could say, is that we know how this is all going to end, that we know what the step is, but we don't. So together, we're going to keep communicating, keep educating, and keep trying to make ourselves better. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining, and look forward to staying in touch with all of you. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.